they have it all: mega yachts, London mansions, private jets. For decades, the Russian oligarchs flaunted their almost unimaginable wealth across the globe. But now, their world is under fire. Their yachts are being seized in European ports. Their assets are frozen. Their empire, once seemingly untouchable, is crumbling under the weight of global sanctions. But who are these men? And how did a small group who grabbed the wealth of a fallen empire end up in the crosshairs of the West and the very man they helped bring to power? To understand how the kings of the 90s became the pawns of today, we have to go back to the moment it all began: the collapse of the Soviet Union. In 1991, the Soviet Union, a global superpower, just ceased to exist. In its place, the new Russian Federation was born into absolute chaos. This wasn't just a political collapse, it was an economic apocalypse. The old system was dead, but a new one hadn't been built yet. This created a massive power vacuum, an economic Wild West, where the rules were being written on the fly by those bold enough, connected enough, and ruthless enough to grab their chance. The government, led by President Boris Yeltsin, was desperate. It was trying to create a market economy overnight while staring down bankruptcy. The solution? Privatization, selling off the huge state-owned companies that had been the engine of the Soviet economy. But this was no ordinary sale. Enter a group of ambitious, well-connected businessmen. They saw a once-in-a-millennium opportunity. The government needed cash, and it needed it to fund its operations and Yeltsin's critical 1996 re-election campaign against a resurgent Communist Party. A plan was devised, one that would become the foundation of the oligarchs' fortunes: the loans for shares scheme. The concept, pushed by figures like banker Vladimir Putin, was deceptively simple. A handful of private banks, owned by these aspiring oligarchs, would lend money to the broke government. In return, they'd get temporary control over shares in the most valuable state assets, the crown jewels of the Soviet industrial machine. We're talking about massive oil companies, nickel mines, and steel plants. When the government inevitably defaulted on these loans, the banks were allowed to auction off the shares. But these were rigged auctions. The bankers holding the shares organized the sales themselves, making sure they and their allies won the assets for a tiny fraction of their real value. Mikhail Khodorkovsky, a former communist youth leader, acquired the oil giant Yukos, estimated to be worth around $5 billion, for just over $300 million. Boris Berezovsky, a former mathematician, took control of the oil company Sibneft, worth $3 billion, for about $100 million. Through these deals, a new class of rulers was born. They weren't elected, but by the mid-90s, they controlled huge chunks of the Russian economy and, through their media companies, the political narrative. Their support was crucial in securing Boris Yeltsin's 1996 presidential victory, cementing their status as the kingmakers of the new Russia. By the end of the 1990s, the oligarchs were the masters of Russia. They owned the factories, the oil fields, the banks, and the TV stations broadcasting into nearly every home. But their patron, President Yeltsin, was sick, and the country was still shaky. The oligarchs, led by the influential Boris Berezovsky, knew they needed a successor, someone who could guarantee stability, protect their property, and, most importantly, someone they thought they could control. Their eyes landed on a quiet, disciplined, and seemingly boring figure, a former KGB agent named Vladimir Putin. He had climbed the bureaucratic ladder with a reputation for loyalty and getting things done. The oligarchs saw him as a manager, not a master. They threw their immense financial and media power behind him, engineering his rapid rise from head of the FSB to prime minister, and finally, to acting president when Yeltsin unexpectedly resigned on New Year's Eve, 1999. It was the ultimate kingmaker's bargain. The oligarchs had installed their man in the Kremlin. They believed they had secured their fortunes and their influence for a generation. They made only one catastrophic miscalculation. They completely underestimated Vladimir Putin. Putin didn't see the oligarchs as partners. He saw them as a threat to his vision of a strong, centralized Russian state. In the 90s, power flowed from wealth. Putin was determined to flip that equation. From now on, wealth would flow from power. His power. And he wasted little time making the new rules of the game terrifyingly clear. The message was delivered through one man, Mikhail Khodorkovsky. By 2003, he was Russia's richest man, with a fortune estimated at over $15 billion. He had turned Yukos into a modern transparent oil company and was openly funding opposition parties. He was acting like a Western tycoon, believing his wealth made him untouchable. He was wrong. On October 25, 2003, as his private jet refueled at an airport in Siberia, it was stormed by armed FSB commandos. Khodorkovsky was arrested, flown to Moscow, and put on trial for fraud and tax evasion. The trial was widely seen as a political power play, a show of force to send a chilling message to every other oligarch. You are not immune. Challenge the Kremlin, and you will be destroyed. Khodorkovsky was found guilty and sentenced to years in a Siberian prison camp. His multi-billion-dollar empire was dismantled and swallowed by state-controlled companies. The richest man in Russia was now its most famous prisoner. The shockwave was immediate. Soon after, Putin reportedly gathered the remaining oligarchs. The old deal with Yeltsin was dead. As the story goes, he laid out the new terms. You can keep your fortunes, but on one condition: stay out of politics, completely. And some say he made it clear that the price of doing business was a 50% cut, not for the state, but for the system, for the vertical of power he was building. Whether that meeting happened exactly as told, the effect was the same. The message was received. A new social contract was sealed not in law, but in fear. The Khodorkovsky affair split the oligarchs into two groups, the exiles and the loyalists. Boris Berezovsky, the very man who had championed Putin, became his most bitter enemy. Realizing his mistake, he fled Russia in late 2000 for the UK, where he funded opposition movements and called for Putin's overthrow. The Kremlin pursued him relentlessly. In 2013, he was found dead in his home under mysterious circumstances. Others learned the lesson of Khodorkovsky and adapted. Roman Abramovich, once Berezovsky's protege, proved to be a master of the new system. He showed his loyalty by selling his oil company, Sibneft, to the state-owned firm Gazprom for a reported $13.1 billion in 2005. He cashed out at the peak, turning his political risk in Russia into a vast fortune. He used it to buy super yachts, art, and the Chelsea Football Club, becoming the global face of a new state-sanctioned Russian wealth. This was the new model for the Russian oligarch. They were no longer kingmakers, they were subjects. Their wealth wasn't a source of independent power anymore, but a privilege granted in exchange for absolute loyalty to the Kremlin. They became custodians of strategic assets and tools of Russian state influence abroad, projecting an image of power and prosperity while knowing their fortunes depended entirely on the will of one man. This brings us back to today, to the seized yachts and frozen bank accounts. The war in Ukraine triggered a wave of devastating sanctions, and the oligarchs' global lifestyles made them the perfect targets. The bargain they made 2 decades ago, choosing wealth over influence, has trapped them in a gilded cage. For years, they enjoyed the perks, living a life of unimaginable luxury, protected by the very system they helped build. But now, they're caught. In the West, they're seen as cronies of the Kremlin. In Russia, their loyalty is always being tested, and the state has shown it can reclaim assets at any time. While the number of Russian billionaires has returned to pre-war levels, their collective wealth has shrunk. They are, in real terms, getting poorer, a far cry from their peak influence in 2008. They orchestrated one of the biggest wealth transfers in history, only to build a new empire that would ultimately own them. They have billions of dollars, but what they don't have is the one thing they thought their money could always buy: freedom. If you want to understand more about the hidden mechanics of global power, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications for our next video.